Okay, grade 8, this is your 5 or 6.6 questions, answers from MathLinks 8. This is your last section of the fraction chapter before your test, and it's your order of operations. So the first question that it was assigned was question 4, which has 3/4, take away a half times 2/3. So since we have two operations, what we know by now is that the first operation I should simplify is the multiplication. And the product of 1/2 and 2/3, the easiest way for me to do this is to reduce before I actually do my product. 2 over 2 will become 1 over 1. And that will simplify into 1 times 1, which is 1, and 1 times 3, which is 3. Now, if you didn't cross reduce and you just kept it 1/2 times 2/3, and you multiply your numerators and you multiply your denominators, you got 2 over 6, which reduces down to 1 over 3. But obviously, instead of doing all of that, cross reduction makes it a little bit easier. And I just go 1/3. Now that I have subtraction, I'm going to find my common denominator of 12. The equivalent fraction to 3/4 that has a denominator of 12 is 9/12. They have the same number, both are decimal 7/5. Multiply both numerator and denominator by 4, you create an equivalent fraction that's 4/12. That is equivalent to 1/3. 9/12 take away 4/12 is 5/12. Remember, when you subtract or add fractions, you keep your denominator. You don't add or subtract the denominator. Question B says 2 1/5 divided by 4/5 to take away a quarter. So it says do this first by putting it in brackets. So I'm going to keep a common denominator of 20. 4/5 is equal to 16/20 because I multiply both by 4 to get an equivalent fraction. The equivalent fraction to 1/4 is 5/20, and 16/20 take away 5/20 is 11/20. So the bracket simplifies down to 11/20. So 2 1/5, if I think about that, I'm not going to deal with improper or mixed fractions. I'm going to change it all to improper fractions instead of mixed. So really this whole question becomes 11/5 or 2 1/5 divided by what the bracket simplified to be 11/20. So the rule for division is keep your first fraction, change to multiplication, and use the reciprocal of the second. And this question's really nice because the 11 over the 11 simplifies into 1 over 1, and the 20 over 5 simplifies to be 4 over 1. So when I multiply my numerators out, I get 4. When I multiply my denominators, I get 1. So the answer is simply 4 for the second question. All right. I'll extend this down a bit here. Extend the page. Your third question, C, is a little bit longer. There's 3 operations. So there's an addition, there's a multiplication, and there's a brackets with a subtraction. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtraction. But before I even do that, I'm going to pull down all of this. And because I know I'm going to deal with improper fractions, I'm just going to change them all to improper to start. And I'm just going to bring all of this down. And then I'm just going to work out what the brackets are, and then just put that right here. So 1 1/4 is really 5/4, take away 3/4. Nice thing is the common denominators are there. So 5/4 take away 3/4 is 2/4, which I know in lowest terms is a half. So you can actually put 2/4 there if you want. It's easier if you put whatever your answer is in lowest terms. In this case, 2/4 is a half. It makes it much easier. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply, because that's what I should do next in order of operations. And in order to multiply them, multiply your numerators, multiply your denominators. Your answer is going to be 5 over 4. So I'm going to keep that as 5 over 4. And my last step is to add them together. I just brought this down. Keep your common denominator at 4. That's 14/4. 7/2 and 14/4 is the same fraction. So 14/4 plus 5/4 is 19/4, which is 4. That's 16/4, and 3/4 left over. So that's your answer for the last one. Question 5, it says calculate. So brackets are there first, so it says do the addition first. So I'm going to use a common denominator, because when adding you need common denominators. 5/6 stays that way, plus 4/6. The simplification of those brackets works out to be 9/6. I'm not going to change it to 1 3/6 or 1 1/2. I'm going to keep it as an improper fraction. I'm going to multiply that by 3/7. When multiplying fractions, check for cross reduction. 3 over 6 can reduce down to 1 over 2, not 2 over 1, but 1 over 2. Multiply my numerators, I get 9 times 1 over 2 times 7, which is 9 over 14, which is your answer in lowest terms. The next question, B, there are 3 operations. The first one I'm going to do is this division. So I'm going to keep a half here, and I'm going to think about 3/5 multiplied by the reciprocal. So really, if I was just to rewrite this question, that's what I'd, 2/5, not 2/5. I don't even have to write this. Well, I'll write it there, why not? Divided by 2/5, I'll write it there. So I'm going to simplify this, and so it's 1/2 plus, if I cross reduce, I end up with 4/5 there, because that becomes 1 over 1, and 4/5 is what's left, divided by 2/5. This 1/2 is not being touched yet, but 4/5 multiplied by the reciprocal. Ooh, that's really nice, because that reduces to 1 over 1. That reduces to 2 over 1. When I cross reduce that, I just get 2. And I'm going to keep it as 2, because 1/2 plus 2 is a question that I can probably do in my head, because all you're really doing is you're adding on a whole number to a fraction, and your answer is 2.5. And finally, the last one, 1 2/5 times 2.5 divided by 1 1/8, take away 2/3. Do the brackets first, so it's 9/8 take away 2/3. Common denominator will be 24. We'll have times 3 to get 24, so you multiply this by 3, you get 27 24ths is equivalent to 9/8. Multiply this by 8 and this by 8, you get 16 24ths. 27 24ths take away 16 24ths is 11 24ths. So the brackets work out to be that. And the rest of this just comes down. But while I bring it down, I'm going to simplify these into improper fractions. So 1 2/5 as a improper fraction will be 7/5 multiplied by 5/2 divided by the answer to the brackets, which was 11 24ths. Multiply these two things first. Aha, cross reduction comes in handy here. That's going to be 7 over 2 divided by 11 24ths. And I'm going to simply use the rule for division, which is keep your first fraction, change to multiplication, and use the reciprocal of the second fraction. Look for cross reduction. In this case, there is. 24 over 2 will become 12 over 1. Multiply your numerators out, you get 7 times 12, which is 84, over 1 times 11, which is 11. Your answer is going to be 7, which is 77, plus 7/11. That's your answer for that last question. Question number 6 says Leo earns $16 an hour as a gardener in a city park. For time worked above 35 hours in a week, he earns time and a half. How much does he earn for each of the following numbers of weeks worked? So if you look up top here for A, I gave you a hint. This one right here, 16 times $35. Since every hour 35 or under, he makes 16 bucks an hour. This expression, 16 times 35, is going to represent his regular wage, which is $16 an hour, multiplied by the regular hours, which is 35. But in addition to that, that's why we have an addition sign there, he gets 1.5 times for over. So it's $16 an hour times 1.5 hours. He gets 1.5 times that, times only, this one here is actually should be X, but for the first example, A, he worked 1 hour of overtime because he worked 36 hours. And if he works 35, he gets regular. So he worked 1 hour of overtime. So let's do that again. So it's $16 an hour times the first 35 hours, plus he gets $16 times 1.5 times his regular hours, multiplied by 1, which is how many overtime hours he worked. So 16 times 35. So 16 times 35. He makes $560 in regular wages, plus, here I got to use my fraction sense of 16 over 1 times 3 over 2, cross reduce, 8 over 1. He makes 24 bucks an hour for his overtime. Instead of making 16, he makes $24, which is 1.5 times the $16, multiplied by 1, which is how many hours he worked. So it's 560 plus 24, which equals $584 in wages for week 1, for that first question, A. Now for question B, nothing changes. The only thing that changes is this number 1, because that's how many hours of overtime. So this still represents his out regular. This still represents how much he gets paid for overtime hours. And this times is going to be how many overtime. So if he works 39 hours, that means he worked 4 hours of overtime. Now this one we already know. So we already know that 6 times half, we already worked it out, is 24, right? So really, what we have here is just regular hours and overtime hours. Here he makes 16 bucks an hour, and for every hour of overtime he makes $24 an hour. So 6 times 35, oh my god, I got a memory like a bean sprout, we just did that. So 16 times 35 is $560 for his regular wages, and then 24 times 4 is $96 for his overtime. So altogether, he would have $654 in money for working a 39-hour week. And again, we can just kind of change this around. So now we got to figure out, I'm going to keep the 560 there. That's not going to change. I'll forget it if I don't put it. This time, if he works a 42-hour week, right? If he works a 42-hour week, he worked 7 hours of overtime. So the only difference between these two is going to be 24 times 7, which is $168 in overtime pay. And when you add those two together, you get $728 if he worked a 42-hour week. That's C. And the last one, if he worked a 37.5-hour week, okay, so that means he worked 2.5 hours of overtime. So this is still 560 plus 24 over 1, that's how much he makes per hour, times 5 over 2, which is 2.5 hours as mixed fraction. Cross reduce here, I get 12 over 1. 12 times 5 is 60, 60 over 1. He gets $60 for overtime, which means altogether he makes $620. Question 7 said 2/3 of the land on a farm is used for grazing beef cattle. The rest of the land is used to grow crops. Half of the land for crops is used to grow corn. What fraction of the land on the farm is used to grow corn? So the best way to do this is to draw a picture. So this is going to be the farm, okay? And 2/3, so I'm going to draw 1/3 and 2/3, and I'm even going to erase this. So 2/3 on the farm is used for grazing beef. So this is beef. That's 2/3. Let's put a dotted line down here to show thirds. That's all beef. 2/3 of the farm is beef. The rest of the land is crops. So this all here is for crops. That's a third, right? But half of that land is used to grow corn. So half of this is used to grow corn, and the rest is used to grow other crops. So what fraction is used to grow corn? So really, if 2/3 is used to grow beef, then that means that half of 1/3, which is the crop part of the farm, is used to grow corn. So that's really an easy one. That's half of 1/3, which is 1/6. So 1/6 of the farm is used to grow corn. Question 8 is similar to the last one in terms of drawing. Melissa and Shinzo found half a pitcher of iced tea in the fridge. Well, if they just found it, it's probably not safe to drink if they didn't know it was there. But whatever. They're rebels. They equally shared 3/4. So I'm going to draw the pitcher of iced tea. And I'm going to draw it wide. And I'm going to say this is iced tea. Iced tea. And they shared this equally. They shared 3/4 of whatever that was in. So they shared 3/4 of the half pitcher of iced tea. They shared 3/4 of the iced tea between two people. Okay? So you take 3/4 of the pitcher of the half, and they took that and they divided it between the two of them, right? So we work this out. This is 3/8 of the pitcher they drank. So if they drank 3/4 of this half, so there's a quarter, there's a quarter, and there's a quarter. They drank 3/4 of it together. But it says how much did each of them drink? Well, since this is 3/8 of an entire pitcher divided between the two of them, we would change this to 3/8 multiplied by the reciprocal. Each of them would drink half of 3/8, which means you would have 3/16. So each person would have drank 3/16 of a pitcher. Okay? Now, if 3/16 of a pitcher was drank, what fraction of the pitcher of iced tea was left over? Well, if they drank, okay. So really what we want to think about is there was half a pitcher of iced tea in that thing, and they drank 3/8 of it. Okay? So if there was half a pitcher and they drank, so half a pitcher, take away the 3/8. Find your common denominator is 8. That'd be 4/8, take away 3/8. That means that 1/8 of the pitcher of iced tea was left. Question 13 says, add one pair of brackets to the left side of each equation to make the equation true. So for this first question, 5/2 times 3/5 minus 2/5 plus 1/2. I know that if this says plus 1/2, I know if I can get this to equal 1/2, 1/2 plus 1/2 will equal to 1. So maybe it's possible that I can get this to equal 1. So let's look here. If I put my brackets here, 3/5 take away 2/5 is 1/5. So 5/2 multiplied by 1/5. If I think about cross reduction, the 5/5 will become 1/1, and I'll be left with 1/2. So if this was done, this would become 1/5, right? I'll use my, see if I can use this here. That work? No, it's not going to work. This becomes 1/5 right in here if I subtract those two. And 5/2 times 1/5 is 1/2. So the answer is, if I put my brackets around there, this will equal 1. So in the next question, B, I really only have two places I could put brackets. The only place I could put brackets are here, and the other place I could put them is here. Because I would never put brackets around here, because that would be the first thing I would do anyway. I'm going to do that first regardless of what the question says, because with brackets, with order of operations, I would have to do division first if there wasn't brackets there. So I wouldn't put brackets around that. So if I put brackets around here, that's going to be 4. And 4 divided into 3/4 is going to be 16/3, which doesn't seem reasonable. So if I try putting them in the other spot, 3/4 take away 1/8. Well, that's 6/8 take away 1/8, which is 5/8. I like the way this is going. So if I put brackets around there, this is 5/8. This is going to become 5/8. So then 1 1/2 plus 2 1/2 divided by 5/8 is going to be what my good question is. Oh, hang on, cancel. 2 1/2 is going to become 5/2. And I got to use multiplication by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal will be this, right? Put your lines through here. That's 1/1. 8/2 becomes 4/1. 1 1/2 plus 4 is 5 1/2. So your brackets do go around right here. And in your last question, there's only two places you can put brackets. You can either put them here. Actually, there's 3 places, I suppose. There's there, there's here, or there's actually around the entire thing here, right? I know that I will not put brackets around here because that would be done first anyway. So I'm pretty sure it's one of those 3 places. So I'm going to just say, why don't I try the brackets around here, just to see what happens. So this will be 2/3 take away. Well, 1/6 plus 5/6 is 6/6, or 1. So I have 2/3 take away 1 divided by 16/9. Okay? So my next thing I would do would be to do 1 divided by 16/9. And in order to do that, I have to think about 1 as being 1/1. And I change it to multiplication by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal would be 9/16. That would give me 1 times 9, and so my answer to this one would be 9/16. And it doesn't look like that's going to work out because this is almost 3/4 to begin with, and this is over half. So I know that I screwed up somewhere. That can't be where my brackets go. So then I try something else. Well, what if I tried my brackets right here? So use a common denominator of 6. 4/6 take away 1/6 is 3/6, which would be a half. And if I'm going to copy down the rest, I might as well change it to multiplication by the reciprocal right now. That will work out to be 1/2 plus 45 over, 190, or over 96. This doesn't look right either, because that's, yeah, that can't be it. Did I screw up somewhere there? 5, 6, 2/3 plus 1/6 is 4/6. Oh, I did screw up. Here's where I screwed up. Oops. Oopsie daisy. So common denominator is 6. That's 1/6. That's going to be 4/6. Oh, no, that's right. I did that right. So maybe it is this whole thing. Maybe it's this one right here. Maybe if I do all of that together. So this would be 4/6 take away 1/6 plus 5/6, which would be 4 take away 1 is 3. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8/6 would be your answer. 8/6 multiplied by the reciprocal of that. So then we'd have cross reduction. 18 over 6 would be 1 over 2. 9 over 6 becomes 3 over 2. When I work that out, I get 3/4. That was a tricky one. So the brackets actually go around all of C, except for the division. And that's all of your questions. So hopefully you didn't spend too much time on that. The video took 21 minutes. I hope you got all the answers you need. And if you have any questions, make sure you ask them tomorrow.